What's up, everyone? It's Brian Horning here with the Security Squawk podcast. Today I have with me Randy Bryan down with Tech Rescue in Texas. And today we have a special guest with us, Greg Edwards, the CEO and founder of CryptoStopper. And today we're going to get into some really good discussions about ransomware and what ransomware is and what you need to be worried about, and really how you can use Greg's product to help protect your environment from things like ransomware. So before we jump into the content today, remember, Randy, Andre, who's not with us today, and I don't get paid for this. We do this out of the goodness of our heart to try to spread awareness around cybersecurity and things like ransomware. The only thing that we ask is if you're listening to this podcast and you're educated or your perspective was changed or we entertained you in any way, that you give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform and you share us out to your friends and family and spread the word organically about what we're doing here. It helps our show tremendously, and it helps us want to put out content like this and bring guys like Greg on to educate you more about these things. So Randy, Andre, how are you, sir?
I'm pretty good. Feel bad for Andre not feeling good today. Hopefully he's tuning in, maybe just laying there tuning in with his eyes closed, listening to it. But I'm excited today. I'm excited about our guest today and our discussion.
Yep, I am too. So Greg, welcome to our show. Thank you for coming and talking with our audience about ransomware and your product, which is called CryptoStopper. Where in the world are you?
So I am in the middle of Iowa. So I'm just north of Iowa City, Iowa. I live on a 60-acre farm, and I've been here once the lockdowns started. I moved and started working from home, and I have actually been loving it and still working from home.
Nice. Iowa. So there's actually a lot of good things.
Just north of.
Sorry about that. That was my fault.
That was your fault. I was like, I'm hearing a lot of different things.
Yeah, I was getting some echo. I thought it might have been on my end. We probably need some additional techs on here to help us out.
So there's a lot of good things from a tech space happening in Iowa, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really have an entrepreneurial community now in Iowa that didn't exist even 5 years ago, that are helping entrepreneurs. I've been an entrepreneur since 1998, back when being an entrepreneur wasn't really a thing, or it just wasn't as hyped as it is today. But we really have a great entrepreneurial community and great tech community here in Iowa.
Yeah, I was doing some research, and I was working on some things, and I noticed a lot of companies that I was encountering were in Iowa, and I'm like,
what's going on?
I was actually awesome, because I actually had a client for a long time who was born and raised in Iowa, and he moved to New Jersey. And so I kind of knew Iowa very well. I can't remember the name of the sandwich. It's chopped meat. What is it called? Made Right.
Made Right. Oh, yeah.
So they actually had Made Rights flown in, so we could try it. It's basically, we have the cheesesteak here in Philadelphia, and he was like, "This is our cheesesteak."
Yeah, tacos in Texas, barbecue.
So it was the Made Right. So it was actually very good. He made me put ketchup and mustard on it, because I think that's the way you guys have it. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it was good. So welcome, sir. I appreciate you joining Randy and I today to kind of talk about ransomware and everything that's going on today with that. So the first thing I want to kind of get into with you is something that we touch on a little bit here on the podcast, and that is how security should be done properly. And we talked about it a little bit in the green room, and we discussed this layered approach to security. And by no means are you touting that your product is the end all be all when it comes to ransomware protection. So educate our audience from your perspective on how you see the security landscape and what layered security actually means from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I think as IT guys, we previously had been building these bigger and bigger walls to keep the attackers out, and thinking that really firewall and antivirus is what we needed, right? And for a good 20 years, starting back with the I love you bug, back in the early 2000s was the first really big malware event that hit, and that's when cybersecurity, in my opinion, really, I mean, cybersecurity started before that, but kind of when it started for the masses, and it really involved antivirus and firewall, and that was it for a long time. Today, that's not enough anymore, and so when I talk about a fully layered defense in depth security posture, that includes not only, I mean, antivirus and firewall are still part of that, but then an EDR solution, which is endpoint detection and response, so that you're collecting all of the information that's happening on the entire network. If the infrastructure is large enough, a SIEM to go with that, and then patch management, user education, all of the NIST framework to be able to pull the right components together so that you can go through that full cybersecurity life cycle and lifestyle. Let's make it a lifestyle.
I agree 100% that it becomes a lifestyle. And I think, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm a pretty outspoken guy, especially when it comes to stuff that I'm passionate about. And this is absolutely something that I'm passionate about. And one of the things, I literally just got off a mastermind call with a group that I belong to. And one of the things we talked about on that was the thought, and I don't know if you share this perspective, and you might not be as rigid as I am on this, but a lot of MSPs out there today, and I like to think that my company is a little bit ahead of the pack on this, but a lot of the things that I'm seeing other MSPs and my competitors doing is they're doing one thing. Like, they might buy an endpoint protection and maybe something like a CryptoStopper, and they're considering that, or they're saying that they're doing cybersecurity. And you mentioned doing the full NIST framework, right? So, if you're an MSP and you're listening to this, that's where you need to get to at a maturity level with your MSP, is having somebody or yourself do a self audit against the NIST framework, and not just going out there and buying tools and throwing this tool and that tool in. The approach should be, you're trying to satisfy the framework, not just collect a bunch of tools and then call that cybersecurity. And that's what I see a lot of. I see a lot of MSPs grabbing onto a tool or two or three and then saying, we're now doing cybersecurity, or we're calling us a cybersecurity firm. So do you have any opinion on that?
I from my standpoint, I completely agree. I mean, I think we have some great tools out there, but the tools without the proper implementation, the right training, and the right staff managing and monitoring it are worthless. So, I mean, I think having, starting with the right tools, but there are so many good tools out there. So get the right set of tools, but then make sure you're following that framework, and make sure that the techs that are running it are experts in that set of tools, and that they are following the framework.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then, if you're an MSP friend listening to this and you don't have those techs, or you don't have that bench strength, then you can outsource that to, another company who can do that. There's all these things that are available to you. So you got to just figure out what the right stack is for where you are in your business today. But don't just go out and buy tools and ask questions to vendors. Go get the framework, understand what the framework is, and then build your tools around that. That's what I'd recommend.
Yeah, and I would say the other thing is, it's not just about the tools either. I mean, the configuration side of it is so important, and making sure that that there aren't mistakes being made there, because you can have all the right tools in the world, but if the configuration is wrong, you still have problems.
Yeah, and we're a CompTIA security plus Trustmark certified company. So we've been audited against the NIST framework, and we've achieved that level of certification with them. And just to give people an awareness around that framework will make you put policies and procedures in place that will make you check the things that Greg just mentioned, right? When there's misconfigurations in place, you should have policies and procedures to detect these things and find these things and make sure that you're doing everything the right way. So that's why I'm a big proponent of everybody getting on board, all businesses, not just MSPs, getting on board with the NIST framework. It's this whole crazy thing with the government putting out these memos and putting out these statements of how to do cybersecurity when they already have the NIST framework, right? The White House came out with a memo last week, and they gave you like 5 points of everything that you should do to stop ransomware, which missed the mark, in my opinion, because they didn't even talk about user awareness training. And if you're trying to stop ransomware without user awareness training, good luck. But, they have the NIST framework. So why aren't we pushing businesses to that? So
comment on that.
Go ahead, sir.
So the NIST framework is the National Institute of Standard
Science.
Yeah. So and it's a cybersecurity framework. So you can search NIST cybersecurity framework. And I would basically challenge, if there's any business owners that are watching this that are not MSPs, make sure that you are evaluating your current MSP, your IT provider, by that standard. Don't just go by what they say, but make sure that they're also following through on that, because this is a framework that's been researched, it's constantly evaluated, and it works. And like you said, it brings in things that people don't think about sometimes, like user training and user awareness and a lot of other things like that. So would highly encourage business owners to become aware of it and make sure that your technology people are following it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I would say to the MSPs and the business owners out there, don't be overwhelmed when you, or you probably will be overwhelmed when you first look at it, but you have to start somewhere. And going through I don't even remember how many items are there. It's a lot, but
it's 53 to do the baseline.
53.
Right?
There you go.
And then 171 if you want to go deeper, right? So, but at a minimum, you're looking at 53 controls that you want to satisfy just to get that minimum baseline of cybersecurity controls in place. So,
yep. And that can be overwhelming. So don't let that stop you, though. I mean, pick out the biggest items and start there. And we started on this years ago, so it's not something that you're going to implement overnight. And there are resources where you can bring in outside help to speed that up. But get started.
Yeah, the advice I'm giving people on my company's YouTube channel is, I talk about it a lot, but it's we typically see it taking anywhere from 1 more to 2 years for somebody to, if they're starting from ground zero, to fully implement something like the NIST framework. So, like you said, there's no better day than tomorrow to start if you haven't done anything yet. So, So Greg, I want to jump into a couple of things that are important, because if you're not an MSP and you're watching this or listening to this, it's important for us to point out that we're going to talk about Greg's product a little bit and how it helps. But Greg has a product where he's gone to market, and it's known as channel only. And I'm quickly just going to describe what that is. And channel only means that you can only get Greg's product through a company like mine or Randy's or another IT provider or managed service provider that has decided to partner with Greg. You can't go and buy this from Greg's website direct as a business owner or person. So you would have to get this through an IT provider. Now, do you sell to like an IT department, or would they have to partner up with like a managed service provider to get your?
Yeah, so we've gone fully channel where we don't sell direct anymore. And the reason for that is just making sure that the tool is getting properly used and implemented, and not
Yeah, and that's a big key that I think a lot of people wonder, like, why does a company go channel only? Like, why can't we sell through? I'll give you Datto, right? Datto decided a long time ago, we're going channel only. And from what I can tell, and most people, it was the right call, right? And that was their thing, because we don't want to have to keep training people over and over and over to use our solution, because it requires some training. And there's a cost to your company when you have to do that for every single person that comes along and signs up. When you do it through the channel, you train us once, and now we know how to do it for however many companies we have, which could be tens, hundreds, whatever. And then now we're taking care of that piece of it for you, and you can focus on making a better product, right, at the end of the day. So
Yep, exactly.
So your product helps stop ransomware. And I think a lot of people are very interested to know how you stop ransomware. So first, I always like to kind of break things down at a lower level for people who might not be in our business. What is ransomware from your perspective, and kind of give us some education on that?
Yeah, I mean, so fundamentally, what ransomware does is it locks the files, whether that be on a PC or on an entire network, and then holds them for ransom. I mean, fundamentally, that's all it is. It's just taking control of those files and holding them for ransom. And the way that it does that is utilizing encryption. So it encrypts all of those files, and then you can't access them until you enter a password, a decryption key, to unlock them. That's fundamentally what ransomware is. Now, it's evolving to some degree now, where not only are they encrypting those local files, but they're also exfiltrating, so they're stealing them off of your network, and then ransoming companies for that they won't release that on the dark web. And so that's been happening over the last about 2.5 years, but we've really seen in the last 6 months that's been increasing.
Oh yeah. So, we haven't seen this level of activity in mainstream media around these subjects. This is unprecedented, what we're dealing with, right? Between Colonial Pipeline and then the JBS meat hack. And then we had the Colonial Pipeline CEO in front of the Senate yesterday, which kind of is keeping this all in the headlines. And we're getting calls left and right from people, our own clients who now, even though we've been preaching this to no end for many years, they're kind of like, hey, I don't want that to happen to me.
Right.
Protected. And it's like, well, you're kind of protected, but we need to have a conversation, right? Because chances are, if you haven't been reaching out to, like, I'll give you one thing. In our company, we do quarterly cybersecurity reviews, right? I don't force people to do them, but once a year. You have to do them once a year. But if you don't sign up every quarter, I'm not calling your office saying, hey, you missed your quarterly review. It's kind of like, for lack of a better term, I can't care more than my clients, right? So if they don't care, I can't make them sign up and come to these meetings. But when things like JBS and Colonial Pipeline happen, and they come home from work and it's in their face again, and they're calling you up going, hey, are we really protected? And I think it's really good for the general business population to hear from guys like James Blount, the CEO of Colonial Pipeline, and hear the things that he says, right? Because we're talking about this all the time, but we can be looked at as used car salesmen or people just trying to sell stuff, right? When you actually have a CEO who's gone through a cyber attack and he's basically saying all the same things that we are educating people on, I think people are going to start to become more in tune with, hey, we got to take this more seriously than we have been in the past.
Yeah, and I don't think I always say to CEOs that I don't ever expect them to become cybersecurity experts. No. That's not the point. But they need to understand how they can hold their IT team accountable so that they know. I mean, there's a 2-page report that they should be able to get, probably could squeak it down to a 1-page executive report just to be able to look at monthly and take it seriously so that you can hold your IT folks accountable and make sure that the right things are being implemented.
Yep. So one of the things we discussed before we came live was, and we kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning, so we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on it, but the standard security stack that a IT department or an IT company should be offering. What is that in your mind? What does that kind of look like to you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really about having the right tools, the right processes, and then the right auditing around that security stack. So I don't know if you want me to talk specific like tool sets that.
I think that would be helpful for people just to hear some ideas.
Yeah. So we started off with the firewall and antivirus. I mean, those are, that's where it started. But making sure that those are managed, both the firewall and the antivirus, to make sure they're staying up to date. Then I think some sort of, whether it's next gen AV that includes endpoint detection and response, and maybe explaining a little more around what that is. But endpoint detection and response is recording everything that's happening at that endpoint, and that's really where the attacks are happening today. It's not, 5 years ago it was all about protecting the servers and making sure they weren't compromised, but now it's all about protecting the endpoint. So what that endpoint detection and response does is it records everything that's happening at the endpoint and then runs that against indicators of compromise to make sure that there's no malicious activity happening out there, and that you can remediate an advanced persistent threat before that advanced persistent threat becomes a full-on ransomware attack or full-on data breach. So, those are just 3 components of that security stack. And then we talk about configuration, making sure that the network is properly configured, user training. So working with, there's tons of end user training to make sure that they're educated and not doing things that they shouldn't be. And what else? What am I missing, guys?
Just the only other layer I think you really didn't hit on was just that application layer, like controlling what can be installed. Now you can do that simply with just taking away admin rights, but some software doesn't need admin rights to install. So having a tool that really monitors what somebody is installing on the system, I think, is another valuable protection layer to guard those assets. So I look at it as basically like 6 layers. You have your data layer, you have your network layer, you have your perimeter, which we talked about with firewalls and things like that. You have your user, your human layer that you have to be worried about. We have all these layers that we have to figure out what are we going to use to protect that layer, right? And that's the tool that you ultimately decide on. And a certain layer may require multiple tools, where I think that's where your product, CryptoStopper, comes in, right? Because I think with a lot of MSPs, one of the first things when they see your product is going to be, well, my endpoint, my advanced endpoint protection already does what your tool does. Can you kind of?
Yeah. So the way that, so first of all, I would challenge that it doesn't.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
And actually 77% of the successful ransomware attacks were against companies that had up-to-date antivirus. So antivirus is not enough.
And attacks are really on the rise right now. So
yeah, and we created, so I think it was back in 2017, we created a demonstration of a fileless ransomware attack before those, what I call live off the land attacks, were even being discussed. And people still really don't understand what a fileless attack is. But I mean, it's essentially leveraging the existing system to pull a script off the web somewhere and execute that script that's completely remote. So there's nothing new introduced to the machine. And that kind of an attack is almost impossible for antivirus to detect. And so the big differentiator, that was the question, why do people need CryptoStopper in addition to their other tools, is because the CryptoStopper is that last line of defense. We deploy bait files throughout the network that then we do file integrity monitoring of those bait files and also of the native files to then detect actively running ransomware and kill it. And that's the differentiator. We're not watching for a virus to be introduced. We're not watching for something new to be introduced. We're watching for ransomware running and kill it. We call it post-execution termination algorithm because ransomware is running and we're killing it after the fact.
Are you able to work with, so there's products available right now, like say ActiveFile, which ActiveFile can encrypt your valuable data. So if it's taken off network, it's no good, or if it's taken off the computer it's on. Are you able to work with a product like that where it can maybe be whitelisted, because it will be encrypting files depending on the policies that you set up?
Yep. And we can work with any of those so that it doesn't, we do have a whitelisting system that we only like to use very minimally, because again, if one of those applications were turned around and started being used maliciously and we had whitelisted it, then it's not going to work. But yeah, traditionally we'll work with any other disk encryption software. And the thing about the disk encryption that people don't realize, I mean, it's awesome for if that's off-sited and stolen, right, that it can't be. So it's good for a data breach situation, but there's nothing to stop a secondary encryption of an encrypted file. I mean, almost everything now is encrypted, but what ransomware does is runs encryption on top of the encryption.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And then anybody who's concerned with the current tool set that they have, what can and can't your tool run with or run on?
So there's actually we haven't run across any. We're very agnostic and feel that we're another layer that should be in the security stack. And so there's not anything that we've come up against that we couldn't run in parallel with.
Oh, so Randy, do you have any more questions before I jump into some more deeper technical ones?
I have a few. So, so a lot of times people will ask when we go to put something on their computer like this, they'll say, "Hey, is this going to slow down my computer?" So, what kind of is it going to do that?
Yeah, the resource utilization is tiny. I mean, and because we run at a Windows kernel level, and so we're watching the file activity and watching our bait files, and so the resource utilization is very minimal.
Okay, and so does it? You said it will shut down the process.
Yep. So it'll do one of two things. Well, and then does some additional things from a remediation standpoint. But there's a desktop version, and then there's also a Windows server version. And so the desktop version will identify the process that's running the ransomware and kill that process. The server and file share version will isolate the offending machine that's running the ransomware and separate it from the network.
So it's still running, but it separates it from.
Yep. And it'll actually also issue a shutdown command to that desktop and then notify the network admin or the MSP about the issue that's going on and give you all of the information. If you guys have dealt with ransomware attacks before, you know that typically what happens is when when the IT guys find out that a ransomware attack is running, you don't know where it's coming from. And so they start pulling network cables, shutting down servers, and then trying to figure out where it came from. So the other thing that our system will do is identify the IP address, the user, so you have all the information to go look at patient zero and remediate the issue.
Do you have the option to isolate and then but not shut down? Some industries are going to have compliance issues where they'll if it's a fileless ransomware, they might need to do forensics on that machine.
Yep.
Do you have the ability, and if you turn it off, you lose everything that's in memory. Do you have the ability to isolate and not shut down?
So we don't right now. If it's detected at the desktop, it's just going to kill that process that was running. So that won't shut it down. If it's from the network, we do automatically shut it down, but that's actually an option that we're planning to implement as an option to give our partners the option to turn that off.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yep.
I think that's all the questions I have so far.
Cool.
Right.
So, couple other things that I think are important for people to know, that your solution only protects Windows computers and servers, right? You're not
correct.
You have something on the roadmap for Macs,
Macs and Linux, but
Linux.
not currently in production.
Got it. Cool. So in terms of how ransomware spreads across somebody's network, if they get it, can you kind of speak to does ransomware, before it rears its ugly head, right? We know that the attackers are already on the network before anybody notices, that big box that pops up, or these README files that pop up all over the place that tell you who you need to contact to get your files back. So we know that they're in there for a while. So if they deploy ransomware across a network, does it go from one computer to the next, like it encrypts files to the next computer, encrypts files, so you're cutting off one computer so it doesn't get to the next computer, or has the virus already spread at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of iterations of that. So the most common kind of small business attack that we're seeing comes through a phishing campaign, and a user clicks either a link or an attachment that starts the ransomware running, and it starts immediately. And most of the ones that are designed to go after a business are going to go and look at what's on the network and start running on the network. So the user doesn't even know anything's happening. Right. But then there are other variants of ransomware where that patient zero then spreads it to as many other devices on the network that it can. They'll even have time bombs set on them so that they spread as much as they can and then wait until 6 p.m. Friday night before doing anything malicious, so that people aren't necessarily there and on the system to see the damage being done until they come in Monday morning. So, I mean, there's all kinds of variations of how ransomware deploys and runs.
Cool. Randy, are you good?
I'm good. I was just going to say that's actually, I heard recently that's the most popular time for ransomware to kick in is Friday at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
So we have had 3 calls in our office, and it's only the 10th of the month. All 3 companies were hit on the Friday before Memorial Day weekend.
Yep. Doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And the time bomb, I mean, it makes sense from their standpoint. And really what people have to think about is that these criminals it's organized crime, and they're running these like businesses.
Oh, very good businesses at that.
Yeah. And I mean, and the other thing is that there's no moral dilemma for them. So most of these attackers are in Eastern European countries, and they're stealing money from us to spend in their country. It's almost like a Robin Hood kind of effect, that they absolutely do not have a moral dilemma around what they're doing in their minds.
No, and you're 1,000% right, because I'm one of those dudes that goes on the dark web constantly and monitors the dark web, and the posts that these guys put on their sites are like, hey, you didn't do security good enough and we broke into your system, and now you need to pay us for a remediation report. All the things that you would get from a legitimate, ethical cybersecurity company, but they're breaking in and they're causing havoc, and then they're saying they're doing it under the guise that we're helping you with security, which is
like the lock messages even say that. They're trying to act like they're doing you a favor,
right? And that's and that's the big thing. It's like, as a business owner who's watching this, where do you want to deal with this event? Do you want to deal with it on the left side of the boom before you get hit, or do you want to deal with it on the right side of the boom after you get hit? Either way, it's going to cost you money. You're going to have to deal with something over a very long period of time, whether you're dealing with a massive PR cleanup. I actually saw something really funny, and I'll mention this since we're getting towards the end of our time here. I literally saw an advertisement yesterday from an acting coach who used ransomware attacks to promote his business, basically saying, you're going to need my services to learn how to have empathy, to learn how to deal with the press if you get hit with a ransomware attack. So it was like a totally interesting spin on how to market your acting classes. Because basically, if you get hit with ransomware, you're going to be thrust into a situation that you probably never thought in your worst day that you would have to deal with.
Yeah. And so far out of most CEOs' element.
Yeah.
To have to deal with that. Yeah.
But the big thing is, it's like with that moral compass situation, when you think about it, the way that the hackers make a CEO feel after this is like they make you feel like you weren't doing enough to protect the data that your customers entrusted you with, right? And they make you feel badly about yourself in this whole process.
And that's part of the whole, they're trying to get you to pay.
Right.
And make you feel like it's totally your fault, and that you need to just pay this and sweep it under the rug. And
And just think about that with the Colonial Pipeline CEO who admitted yesterday that he paid the ransom on day 2, right? So a big company like that, who had the support of the FBI, who had basically the support of anybody who would, he could ask for anybody's help and they probably would have helped him in that situation. And, he's sitting there basically saying, like, I had to do everything I needed to do. And, every CEO who gets hit with ransomware is put in that position.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of them don't have $5 million that they can just say goodbye to.
But like you said, it's not going to be $5 million for a guy who's doing $1 million a year.
Right.
These hackers are going to do their research. They're going to figure out how much money you make, and then they're going to come up with a number that they feel like you can pay that's not going to like completely wipe you out and put you in the poorhouse.
Right.
But they're going to come up with a number that you're going to make them some money. Yeah. Right. So,
and so 40,000 is the least. So I started seeing ransomware attacks back in 2012, and the very first ransom that I saw, the demand was $60.
Yeah. My first one that when somebody came to me was $750.
Yeah.
So.
And in the last 2 years, I think the lowest that I've seen was 40,000.
Right. Yep.
So, yeah, and I know I do have to run here in just a minute.
We got to wrap up.
Any other questions before we?
No, I've got one. So, you mentioned servers and file shares. What about distributed / remote workers? Because
so
there's so much of that going on right now.
Yep. So as long as they're Windows laptops, or desktops at home, whatever, our agent will run on those. So it doesn't have to be in the corporate environment or on the inside of the firewall.
Cool. So Greg, first off, I appreciate you coming on our show and sharing your knowledge about ransomware with our audience and educating people about how you guys are helping us as a team, defend this problem that a lot of businesses are faced with right now. So if anybody watching this wants to start using your product, how can they get to your product and buy it? And do you offer any kind of a trial or guarantee with that?
Yeah, so you definitely can reach out to our sales team at sales@getcryptostopper.com, our website, getcryptostopper.com. You can sign up for a demo and a trial there.
Awesome. And then you also have a free ransomware simulator on your website. Can you talk to us who should be running that tool, who should download it, and what's that for?
Yeah, so MSPs should be running that and testing their defenses against these, especially these fileless attacks. So that script is a PowerShell script that they can run. And we've actually started to build that into our management portal so that you can schedule these. But the manual version is out there for people to download and utilize, and just make sure that what you're doing currently would work against a fileless ransomware attack.
Cool. All right, I'm going to wrap up the show. Greg, again, I'm grateful for you coming on and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. Our audience is surely going to get a lot out of this. Randy, do you have anything for Greg before?
No, that's it. I appreciate you coming on the show. There's a lot of great information.
All right, guys.
Thank you for having me.
Take care. We'll see y'all soon. Take care, everyone.